Welcome, everyone, to Can I Get a Witness? Voices from the Trenches. This is a secular, self-financed project. It's encouraging you to listen to voices of and looking at the artwork of some professionals in their respective fields. Some who've been fired, experienced doxing, lost touch with loved ones, and some who've been canceled, like this political cartoonist, Stella Perrett. Stella worked for the Morning Star, the UK's only socialist daily newspaper, where her cartoons criticized capitalism, Brexit, the American president, and much, much more. Yet with all of her contributions, it was this cartoon, called Endgame, that commented on the impact of potential changes to the Gender Recognition Act and was labeled transphobic. The cartoon was pulled, and then Stella was released from her position. Another artist who was canceled some 13 years ago before Stella is an American filmmaker and a friend of mine, Catherine Crouch. Catherine released her short film, The Gendercator, in 2007 in film festivals all over the world, but it was her director's notes that got her into trouble. She wrote of her film, "Things are getting very strange for women these days. More and more often, we see young heterosexual women carving their bodies into porno Barbie dolls and lesbian women altering themselves into trans men. Our distorted cultural norms are making women feel compelled to use medical advances to change themselves instead of working to change the world. This is only one story showing one possible scary future. I am hopeful that this story will foster discussion about female body modification and medical ethics." Catherine's film was banned in several film festivals that year of 2007. You'll hear her story later on. And so here we find ourselves in 2020. Let's see and hear what's taken shape in many areas that affect our daily lives, some you may not know about.
Hi, everybody. I'm JB. How's it going? So I want to start by saying thank you so much for having me. And it's really nice that you have so many different people and different backgrounds, different points of view in one place. I think we're kind of losing that a lot as we become more of a politically correct, cancel culture type of a society. And I think that's kind of dangerous, and you lose something pretty major when you do stuff like that. So I'm not necessarily gender critical, but as a lesbian, I'm critical of gender. And they're kind of two different things. Lesbians have a very long history of railing against gender and flipping off of patriarchy, and I'm kind of part of that history just by virtue of the fact that I'm a lesbian. So first I want to talk about how I'd like people to start really looking at how lesbians have been depicted in mainstream media. And I'm going to talk about kind of a major butterfly effect. So try to stick with me as I go through this. The butterfly effect kind of starts in one place and leads to a whole lot of other stuff. So when you see butch lesbians, I'm going to do air quotes on butch because I'm talking about categorically people who would be categorized as butch. So that would be someone, here's my picture. I'll put this up. So I didn't choose that dress, by the way, it chose me. So categorically butch would be someone on the left, like my wife, and then categorically femme would be someone who looks more like me. We don't choose the categories, we're just kind of put in those categories, and we understand why we've been categorized that way. But if you look at media, you'll notice that throughout the years, the only times you've ever seen a categorically butch lesbian on TV as if she's being used as a she's really a man punchline, and kind of being mocked. In fact, it's now 2020 and there's still only ever been one butch lesbian actress allowed onto a mainstream TV show as a main character or main-ish character, and that would be Leah Delaria. And other than that, you have people playing the role of, butch lesbian. Maybe they're kind of like learning and preparing on how to do that. And you've seen this major erasure of our actual culture. So what you see, or what you saw for years and years in lesbian culture, was not at all what was depicted on TV. So you had like the friends kind of lesbians, the two like femmy lesbians. And I'm going to explain why this is dangerous a little bit later on, to do stuff like that. And we're going to also, I want people to think about how the mainstream media is male dominated, it's male controlled. Even lesbian publications, they have all their ads are kind of being controlled by how nice they are and how polite they are and how willing they are to bend to what's being asked of the advertisers and stuff like that. So you see a culture developing where lesbians are actually excluded in the name of inclusion. So we're excluded from our own publications. A couple of years ago, I talked to the founder of a pretty major mainstream lesbian publication. And I said, how many lesbians do you have on your staff? And she said, one lesbian writer at a lesbian publication. And what's happened is we've done inclusion to the point that lesbians have been excluded. And that's how you end up with these articles that are telling young lesbians that we need to bring condoms. Yes, condoms. That's actually from a headline. On our dates for PIV sex. That stands for penis and vagina sex. And that you start to get into stuff like gay conversion therapy and coercion there. So lesbians, it got to the point where we were no longer really allowed to talk about our own lives. It got to the point where I published an article in the mainstream and it got promoted, and the next day it was demoted. And it was the first for me. It was a major publication in the mainstream. And that's when I kind of like, I understood what was going on, but it's when I really started to understand the depths of what was happening, how lesbian voices were being controlled. So if you're not a good lesbian voice and you don't do what male-dominated media wants you to do, you're gonna get canceled, which was fine with me. I'd rather tell the truth and keep my integrity than be a liar essentially, and tell someone else's lives and someone else's story and not be able to talk about my own life. So understanding how we've been erased in the media and controlled, and you've only seen categorically butch lesbians as a punchline for such a long time. And then when you do see us, like in, I think 2006 or 7, when my wife and I started to really create in the mainstream visibility for categorically butch lesbians, because we were really concerned about what was going on. And that was around the time that you had the first butch character that was put on a TV show, which was the L Word, trans. So you had Moira, who became Max. And it was kind of devastating I remember to a lot of lesbians at the time to see, oh my God, we finally have, this huge element of our culture being represented on a mainstream TV show. Oh, just kidding. And that's what you're seeing now. Like they kind of just skipped right over us and just headed to the next more acceptable, like culturally acceptable thing. So you've got the teaching of gender ideology happening, which is becoming like an enforced belief system. So it's compulsory. You have to believe this. If you don't believe this, you can't participate. And that's dangerous in and of itself. And when I really started to see this idea of trans kids pick up, that's when I really kind of got extra concerned, because at this point I've been in the media working to create visibility, and we've jumped to this next thing. And the first thing I thought is, why is nobody talking about cognitive brain development. This is something I learned as a first-year psychology student. Why is nobody talking about this? Where are the doctors? Where I searched, I scoured the internet. I'm like, did people collectively forget? Did the entire medical community collectively forget that we don't reach full cognitive brain development until our mid to even late 20s? It becomes a question of ethics and, a situation where it's deeply unethical to kind of label kids, medicalize them, and perform surgeries on them way before they ever have a chance to reach full cognitive brain development. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that understands things like that are long-term risks, that assess risks properly, that understands consequences, that understands long-term consequences. And this is an issue I've had with the Army in the age of signing up for the Army for a long time, which is these kids really don't understand when they're signing up for the Army. They don't completely get it in the way that a person who's had time to fully grow up will get, that you're not a superhero, that you can die. It's not just other people around you that can die. You can also die. So I started really kind of shouting about this online and in the mainstream media. And I started writing about stuff that I wasn't supposed to write about. And when I did it in the mainstream, it had to be kind of like a covert operation just to kind of sneak it in. And then like what happened with this one article I did, it got demoted. So there's the sense that, oh, we don't want people to know that 13-year-old children are getting double mastectomies. We kind of want to hide this information for now. Like we want to keep that locked away and not tell people about it, because anybody, any normal person with any sense of right and wrong would understand that giving a 13-year-old child a double mastectomy way before they have a chance to reach full cognitive brain development is highly unethical. You're already starting to see tons of kids coming forward and detransitioning. And lesbians have been saying this for a while now, but you can't hear us, can you? Because they've excluded us from our own publications. And most of these kids statistically would grow up to be LGB if allowed to grow up. So you've got different studies and statistics, but generally speaking, 75+% are going to grow up to be LGB if they're allowed to grow up. If you don't interrupt them and you allow them to grow up, they're going to grow up to be LGB. And statistically speaking, 85%. So you've got the majority, 85% will desist, which means they'll just be comfortable and be like, oh, okay, this was, and this is something I think most lesbians understand, whether they're categorically butch or categorically femme. We all kind of are in this childhood path together. And then, like we kind of maybe as we get older, we kind of split and maybe like some of us are like, oh, okay, cool. I like these heels, whatever. And then some of us are like, no, I'm not cool with that. And there's kind of this split. So there's this idea right now, I think that femme lesbians don't understand maybe completely, like this idea of dysphoria. But this idea of dysphoria is really just growing up gay, pushing against what society expects from you, not completely understanding the feelings that you're having, trying to grapple with who you are as it relates to the world around you and trying to find your place. And a lot of the time for lesbian, that's going to lead to stuff like, oh, maybe I should have been a boy. And I'd say probably most of the time, it's going to lead to something like that, which is why I think the statistics do show that the majority of kids would, if they were allowed to grow up to be LGBT kids. Because there is this huge sort of issue around, your parents don't want you to sit that way, and they get mad if you do things that aren't, feminine. But my idea is to say that both of these people are 100% womanly. They're 100%. My wife is the epitome of female beauty, if you ask my opinion. And people need to start seeing things that way, because we've reached a kind of very dangerous point in time where people aren't really thinking, and they're listening to lesbians, but I don't think that they're genuinely listening and understanding the full ripple effect. And if you don't understand the full ripple effect, we will find ourselves right back where we are now eventually. So there is a sense that lesbian voices, of all voices, people who are naturally critical of gender, some of the first to defy this idea of gender. And when I say gender, I mean the stereotypes that are kind of doled out to us based on sex. So I'm not saying gender and sex is the same thing. I'm saying sex as biological and gender as stereotypes, roles, expectations that are put on you. And most lesbian children are not going to fit those expectations to some extent or another. Some of us are going to rebel harder. Some of us are not going to rebel quite as hard. But to some extent, there's going to be that clash, you know, especially depending on your culture with the world around you, wanting you to be something that, you know, like kind of instinctively, inherently that you're just not. So it's what we have now is like a form of progressive gay conversion therapy. So they've taken gay conversion therapy and they've wrapped it in a cute little rainbow and they just popped it back on the shelf and they're just like, here, how about now? Do we like this? And what it is a massive human rights violation that's going on right now of gay and lesbian youth. And people will eventually wake up and see that. And I think they're going to be horrified that they didn't speak up, that they didn't, you know, that they didn't push hard against this. I remember years ago when I first started talking about this, it was like tumbleweed. Nobody really coming out and talking about it. People were very afraid to talk about it. They were afraid for their safety, understandably, because there is something that happens. There is a shift in your sense of safety and privacy that happens when you come out with your name and your face. And at the time, it was, you know, a few people like me, Claire Hushin, Julie Bindell. There were just a couple of handfuls of people who were coming forward using their real names and their real faces and saying, hey, what's going on here? Like, go ahead and cancel me. I'm not gonna shut up. And this movement has built and built and built to the point that, yeah, now we've got J.K. Rowling, who, if you had asked me years ago, do you think that you'll ever have the attention of J.K. Rowling? I mean, we were shouting into nothingness. It felt like no one could hear us for the longest time. So I saw someone pose the question online the other day, have you seen a change happen? And I'm like, yes, it's major. People are waking up, and the more people who wake up, the more you're going to see a pushback on what's going on. Because I was, to my knowledge, the best of my knowledge, I was the first one to report about 13-year-olds, which is now has been revealed to be 12-year-olds getting double mastectomies in the mainstream media. Nobody was talking about it, and I had to like sneak it in there. It wasn't an easy thing to do, to get a left mainstream publication to kind of publish those words. There is a cover-up happening, a major cover-up in mainstream media. And I think now I'm starting to see so many more people come forward and say, hey, I'm not down with this. We need to chill. We're really hurting people. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of this sort of effect, this buildup that I'm trying to describe. And it starts here and it ends all the way kind of on the other side, where you've got a lot of stuff happening in mainstream media around shaming lesbians, shaming people who are not conforming to so-called norms. And I want to say it is totally normal for a little girl to rock a buzz cut and a plaid shirt. It is badass to do that. Do it. Encourage your kids to be who they are. We are not these ideas that were placed upon us. And I think it confuses a lot of kids to to the point now where we've got, also gender ideology being taught in schools as this compulsory belief system. And you've got a lot of kids getting confused all of a sudden about my wife and how do we refer to her. And you saw this huge cultural shift to the point where, I think for people like us, it's almost become uncomfortable to leave the house because we were at a point where people are like, oh, the lesbians, we know you, we can locate you, there you are. To, this, we call it like people itting her, where they're afraid to use a pronoun, or they're like, or they're just straight up being disrespectful because they're pissed off about the 100 different genders and, pick a pronoun generation where you're having issues of free speech being violated, and you're forcing people to refer to people by any number of, there's a very large number of pronouns. And you're pushing an ideology onto people. And when you have an ideology, and I think for a long time people were calling it something else, I think it was transgender ideology, and I was kind of underground in some feminist group saying, could we not call it that? Like, could we just say gender ideology? Because if you are saying transgender ideology, you're implying that transsexual people are behind this. And I don't think that pointing fingers is helpful in this scenario. So we have gender ideology. It's a new thing. It's something that's just been birthed. And it's not something we knew about before. You didn't hear the word transgender before. I went to school in New York, of all places, and we had the LGBT union. My wife went to school in Los Angeles, and they had the Gay Straight Alliance. This is a new generational thing where you're seeing something you hadn't seen before. And I was all up in the mix in New York, so I would have known if something was going on. Like, I would have seen it on Christopher Street, which is where I hung out. And you did see awesome people like Malcolm, aka Marsha, who were doing sex work and made more money when they presented as feminine. So they were, kind of doing all that stuff to get by and survive. So you've got this very beautiful sort of but sad and tragic story of Malcolm, who would sometimes flip out if you called him Marsha, or flip out if you said she, her, outside of the space of performing in drag. Because in drag culture, in gay and lesbian culture, if you did drag, which I've done before, I was Romeo, as a drag king. But it was kind of understood and playful, and it didn't hold this kind of value out in the real world, where you're seeing now like people like Storme de la Ravie who are being transed after they're dead. And especially with her, there's a big pushback because we New Yorkers, you didn't walk past the club without seeing Storme de la Ravie. She was in the mix. She worked at the doors, and we knew she was a butch lesbian, or categorically butch lesbian. We knew she did drag. I'm friends with the owner of the club, who ended up being her guardianship towards the end of her life. So, and now you've got this Netflix special that's been put out where she's like kind of the headlining photo, and it says transgender, this and that. And it's like we're kind of, lesbians are just screaming into this void, like, we knew her. What are you talking about? Stop it. Stop rewriting our history. Stop ripping our pages out.
Julia, this is so fabulous. And I know you could go on for this because you've got the history, you've got the connections, and you have written about this stuff so eloquently. We do have questions, and we've got questions. And I'm hoping that, are you feeling like you're pretty wrapped up on the points that you wanted to bring up?
Totally.
Awesome. Well, I got these questions from people, and thank you very much. And a lot of people don't know. Real quickly, tell us who Storme was.
Oh, Storme de la Ravie was a butch lesbian in New York here. She worked at a lot of different clubs. One of one of the ones was Henrietta Hudson's, and I worked there as well. And, you know, I know that I'm friends with the owner and stuff like that. So she also worked at, oh, I can't remember the name of some of the other clubs right now, but she did drag, and she's somebody who has really been, and there's a number of categorically butch lesbians who are being rewritten and revised in mainstream media as trans, which for lesbians, it becomes an issue of, we have so few pages in the history books.
Right,
Why
right.
are you ripping them out and throwing them into a bonfire and recreating and fabricating a history for what? Because you want to create a sense of history for this other group. It's a fabrication. It's not a real history you're creating. You're going through graveyards and pulling corpses out of the ground to relabel them. And for lesbians, there's something really scary about this, especially if you're categorically butch or if you've done drag like myself, because there's this sense that there's no boundaries. Boundaries aren't being respected.
Right.
This woman just died. She's a Black lesbian. She threw the first punch at Stonewall. She started the revolution. She gave a call to arms. Why don't you do something? When the cops came in to harass them that night, she started that Stonewall revolution. And what they've done is what history always does. They give credit to the closest person, you know, man in the room, and they take. So you've got a Black butch lesbian being completely erased from this night, the person who started the Stonewall Revolution, and you've got statues being erected to two people who weren't even there, didn't I identify as transgender. You know, Marsha, aka Malcolm, was a gay man, self-proclaimed, up until the day he died. 5 days before he died, he's on in a documentary, and it is very clear. Yeah, they've added in people years and years later using she, her pronouns and kind of like creating this picture. They're not people that Marcia was best friends with or anything. They're just people that were willing to read the script. And guess what? A lot of them, if you look them up, also did drag. How would they feel if someone revised their history this way?
Exactly, exactly. So Julia, let me get through a couple. I think I've got a bunch here, but I'm going to get through two questions, and then just to let everybody know that who's going to be coming on after Julia is Diana Shaw of Women Are Human, the website. So somebody states here, lesbians were harassed at the Vancouver Pride Parade and no longer welcome for having signs that were not, quote, inclusive. Now they are partnering with a local trans advocacy group. My mind is blown. Are they caving to male demands? What's your response to that?
Absolutely. It's the same thing that you've seen with the lesbian publications. We were excluded in the name of inclusion. If you look at who's running a lot of the dyke marches where they're having these kinds of problems, it's not lesbians, in the sense that, and this is why words are so important. We need words. Words are, they're meaningful. They mean something. I don't want to use 20 words to describe what I mean by lesbian. I don't want to be like uterus having possibly, but maybe not. Also like, you know, vagina. I want to just say lesbian. It has a word, it has a meaning. It's important to lesbians. We have one word in the entire dictionary that we get to describe who we are and how we are placed in the world, and they've tried to rip that out as well. So yeah, once you started with this idea of inclusion, the first thing you saw is lesbians being excluded, being yelled at, being pressured, shouted down, shamed for having, quote, genital preferences. That's a real thing now. So you've got this idea that being a lesbian is now a preference. There's a term called vagina fetishists now that's being thrown at us by people who are, I'm going to do a lot of air quotes, that are activists, but they're not really activists. They're not good people. And yeah, we've been kicked out of those parades. And if you really look into it and you do your homework and you do your digging, you see exactly why it's not okay to carry a sign anymore that says something like, what was it? Somebody there was a sign one year.
Change society, not your body.
There's all kinds of, not even signs like that. There's a sign that says women have, I feel like there was one that's something like lesbians have penises, or lesbians love dick and this is considered okay now. A few years ago, it would have been considered harassment or homophobia, even kind of a, I hate to say hate crime, but like, what, it was definitely not seen as okay to push those ideas in lesbian spaces.
Right. One more comment. This will be the last one, and then we're going to be moving on. This person here says, I think this is a rare opportunity for the left-wing LGB community to get to know the conservative and Christian community and find that even though there are disagreements, there is more goodwill on both sides than the media lets on. Have you experienced this?
Absolutely. I think, I'm big on following people I don't agree with. I'm big on, I don't want to be in a bubble. I don't want to be in an echo chamber. I want to know what different people are thinking. At the same time, I do think it is important for a lot of people to recognize that the issue that we have right now, this massive human rights violation of gay and lesbian youth, we're kind of caused by a lot of the same people who are fighting it right now. And it's not to say that they created this idea that these two boxes, the blue box and the pink box, it's to say that we were all kind of brainwashed into believing that we were supposed to like and embrace those boxes. And that's just not the way it's going to pan out. I did an article with Dr. William Malone and Colin Wright, basically explaining how this isn't even scientifically accurate, that you should think that everyone, if you're a girl or you're female, you're going to like pink and ruffles and sewing, and if you're a boy, you're going to like trucks and plaid shirts and buzz cuts. And when you do that, you really confuse children, because again, their brains aren't developed enough to understand outside of this idea that's pushed on them. No, you gotta like this, you gotta like this, you gotta like this. That's confusing.
Yeah.
When it doesn't fit your world or who you are.
Julia, thank you so much for your contribution. Fantastic as always. And let's all hope that this is helping to break down some gender barriers for parents that are raising kids and not putting them in the blue box or the pink box, and not trying to pray the gay or anything out of boys or girls, and just let us raise them with healthy bodies and good boundaries. So you're doing the good work there. And so at thevelvetchronicle.com,